Muy buenos días y bienvenidos a una nueva sesión con expertos de APLA. Esta presentación será en inglés y me gustaría introducir a Mauricio Davila, co-founder and CEO de EnerChemTek, que junto a su equipo estará presentando acerca del uso de la planificación de escenarios y la gestión de la innovación para combatir la mercantilización y desarrollar estrategias tecnológicas de bajo riesgo. Espero que disfruten de esta sesión. Mauricio, bienvenido.
Hello, thank you very much for attending this webinar, Engage and Escape, using scenario planning and innovation management to combat commoditization. First of all, we thank APLA, the Asociación Petroquímica y Química Latinoamericana, for inviting us to conduct this webinar through them. So thank you very much. And the presenters today are Mitch Halpern and Ken Sinclair. Mitch Halpern is a principal consultant in innovation and IP management for EnerChemTek. He specializes in the development of innovation programs, IP monetization, and evaluation strategies, and scenario planning and training for companies in the process industries and their clients, as well as for research institutions. He has more than 20 years of experience as a consultant and thought leader for senior executives around the world. And Ken Sinclair is a principal consultant for petrochemicals and polyolefins. He specializes in the strategic interpretation of technology for the petrochemicals and plastics industries, and his primary aim is to provide the industry with insights into the role of technology and its exploitation in the achievement of competitive advantage. EnerChemTek is a global firm operating since 2002 as a platform of services that offers expert advice.
Good day, everyone. This is Mitch Halpern. Thank you, Mauricio, for your kind introduction. What we're going to do today is to provide you with an overview of our consulting experience in the realm of helping companies get around issues of technology and product commoditization by combining innovation management tools and scenario planning tools. Our talk today will be divided into 5 parts, as you can see. In the first part, we'll talk about the issues related to technology that are both positive and negative, and how that leads to rapid product commoditization. In the second part of the talk, we'll be dealing with a general description of a strategy that will help you both deal with commodity business and simultaneously develop higher value-added, higher margin, innovative businesses in order to help you get over the effects of commoditization. In the third part of the talk, we'll be discussing the methodology tool chest we use in terms of innovation management and scenario planning. And in the fourth and fifth parts of the talk today, we'll be delving more into detail in terms of innovation processes and scenario planning techniques, and also discuss a little bit of how the scenario planning techniques can be used to look at an issue of primary importance to people in the petrochemical and chemicals industries, and that is carbon dioxide capture and reuse. So Mauricio, if you could switch to the next slide, please. Now, technology, as I said, is a double-edged sword. We know that technology has been responsible to a large extent for global economic growth over the last century and has accelerated tremendously over the last 25 to 50 years. Just looking at this list on the left of technologies that have become key to sparking global economic growth, everything related from computer-aided design, non-destructive testing, rapid process modeling, computer-aided molecular design, advanced materials, machine learning, artificial intelligence. We can go on and spend the rest of this hour just discussing these technologies. But we're not now. I'll start from my description of the bad news. All right. But the bad news is that the technologies that have simultaneously allowed our economies to grow by a tremendous amount have also made it easier to get around the intellectual property barriers and the time to market issues that enable companies to sustain their competitive advantage. So basically, technologies like computer-aided design and rapid process modeling and semiconductor design tools have made technologies pretty much almost obsolete from the day that they are introduced. And we see that by the shrinking market dominance cycles of any new product and the fact that new products are being continuously introduced in order to continue to try to generate competitive advantage. We can design around intellectual property. Basically, today's high margin, innovative new product or service is tomorrow's low margin commodity. Next slide. So, again, in this part of the talk, we'll be looking at how we can get around this two-pronged issue, how we can manage our businesses by a two-pronged approach to both deal with commoditization and generate new innovative products on an easy, low-risk basis to keep our margins as high as they possibly can be. Next slide. So what we need to do is basically both manage our commodity businesses by lowering our production costs, lowering R&D costs, lowering our risks in the marketplace, and to create flexible, robust strategies and to embrace uncertainty. A lot of these things are dealt with in our scenario planning methodology, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. On the other hand, we need to, at the same time, have divisions or operations within our companies to enable us to escape the commodity issues that we're facing and to basically establish a culture of innovation, allow our companies to recognize the value of intellectual property, to capture intellectual property, and to know what has to be done in order to protect our intellectual property. We need to develop efficient ideation, evaluation, and stage gate processes to allow the best of our innovative ideas to be de-risked and to get to the market more quickly and more efficiently. We need to do this in heavily matrixed organizations. Basically, we need to have small groups of dedicated innovation professionals be able to harness in a series of workshops, periodic workshops, teams from across the company in order to efficiently develop and evaluate ideas without distracting these people completely from their normal day-to-day tasks. So the idea here is to create efficient teams with efficient processes to create innovative new products and services, evaluate them, and experiment with them in the marketplace. We also need to basically get feedback from our customer's customer. This is particularly important for B2B businesses, particularly companies that are in the chemicals and petrochemical sector that have historically not paid that much attention to their customer's customer, but really have focused on the demands of their direct customers, consumer products companies, and the like. Now we see these companies having a lot more success if they do second order market research and pay more attention to their customer's customer when getting the feedback they need to generate innovative products and services. And finally, companies need to learn to take a page from the Silicon Valley playbook and to fail fast, create processes that allow companies to experiment quickly and get a sense for what ideas will just not work in the marketplace despite the initial notions that they would, and not invest too much money in trying to bring to market products that have no real future. Now, of course, that process is not perfect. Some products, ideas will attract a lot of investment and turn out to be failures. But in our innovation methodology, and we'll discuss a little bit of this later, we try to do what we can to prevent companies from risking a lot of money and a lot of time up front. Next slide. The tool chest that we use to deal with these issues, as I've discussed, is a combination of innovation management in terms of rapid ideation, rapid evaluation, and stage gate processes, combined with scenario planning methodologies. And these methodologies work very well together to help us implement and engage and escape two-pronged business strategy. Next. Again, I've already discussed some of this, but in tool set A, we're looking at innovation processes such as interdisciplinary team formation that helps break down the silos that exist between groups and divisions of different companies. So we tend to bring people together in our consulting process from the lab, from process development, from basic research, from business development and marketing, and from market research, as well as independent industry and market and consumer research experts. We use a series of workshop-based ideation workshops where we develop new platform ideas. We develop criteria for quickly evaluating these ideas and then carry out preliminary evaluation and ranking of these ideas according to the criteria we develop and the weighting factors we develop. We also use IP landscape analysis at an early stage to get a feel for what the intellectual property landscape looks like in terms of patents and patent citations and key patents that are owned by potential competitors, to get a feel for whether or not it makes sense for us to invest in certain areas. And if we do invest in certain areas, what kind of licensing or agreements we might have to engage in with people who are already in related businesses in order to have freedom to operate in these new areas. We then develop rapid market profiles that go into a lot of these evaluation factors in greater depth, and then start developing detailed stage gate processes based on key performance indicators, customer feedback, and experimentation that allows us to invest gradually increasing amounts of time, money, and development resources in ideas that pass the different stages of development and meet the key performance indicators. There is a current controversy in the innovation community about internal versus external incubation, with some of these ideas that start passing these hurdles and these barriers and meet the KPIs that have been set up. The question becomes how best to develop them. Is it best to develop them internally and subject these ideas to the potential biases that exist within different groups and divisions within the organization, but on the positive side, allow these ideas to have more ready access to resources to push them along the development timeline? Or is it best to create an external subsidiary that allows these ideas to be developed independently of biases that may exist within the organization on the positive side, but on the negative side, it removes these ideas and development processes from having easy access to resources for development. So by moving these development activities to an external incubator or subsidiary, you do run into the political issue of dealing with what essentially amounts to a pseudo-external organization. There is no concrete answer to this dilemma. Some companies, depending on their corporate culture, have success with the internal approach, and some companies have success with the external approach. But be that as it may, no matter which approach you take, you're going to have to probably plug various development gaps by open innovation with academic institutions or other companies via cooperative joint research and development agreements or via licensing. Companies like IBM, for example, have had great success in cross-licensing their intellectual property portfolio for getting freedom to operate in new business areas and to avoid prolonged litigation, as well as to generate income. IBM, as is well known, generates over $1 billion a year of income to their bottom line via out licensing and cross licensing. Now, how does basically scenario planning fit into this? Basically, whether you are evaluating the markets for new innovative ideas or are trying to lower your risk in commodity businesses or your businesses that are rapidly becoming commodities, any strategy that you ultimately develop has behind it what we call in scenario planning a single point forecast. Basically, if you develop a given type of strategy, you have in your mind a view of what the future will look like in your business area 2, 3, 5, 10 years out. Whether you perceive of it that way or not doesn't matter. Every forecast has behind it a snapshot of what you and your colleagues in planning believe the future is going to look like. The problem is that none of us have an accurate crystal ball. We get blindsided by unexpected developments such as COVID-19, which has had a tremendous impact on almost all businesses, some mostly negative, but in some cases, for high-tech software and information technology companies who deal with digitization and externalization, the market is booming because of the need for their services in this pandemic influenced environment. But the bottom line is that almost all strategic forecasts turn out to be wrong because there are many um, problems with relying on a faulty crystal ball. Scenario planning attempts to get around these issues by creating alternative future stories or environment for high impact, high uncertainty forces that are going to have an influence and on the strategic decisions that we need to address. So these allow us to create strategies that will work across many different futures. We call these robust strategies. If nothing else, it enables us to understand the risks we face in terms of committing ourselves to a strategic plan that ignores one or more of these potential futures. And it also allows us to uncover new opportunities together with the innovation processes that we just discussed, and to conserve resources so that we may look at these alternative future scenarios and not put investments in areas that we don't believe are going to represent an accurate view of the future. This can help us create, for example, robust R&D strategies where we can shift our investment priorities depending on signposts we see, events that we see unfolding in the external environment that will give us the hint that we need to change the direction that we're going in. Next slide. So let's look at our first tool set that we use for innovation management, and that goes from the ideation workshops to rapid evaluation to more in-depth evaluation and stage gate processes. Next. Now, when we look at innovation processes, we need to get used to the fact that we need to avoid focusing our brainstorming too early. We need to generate lots of ideas, the overwhelming number of which will not be feasible. But so we brainstorm hundreds of opportunities. At this stage, we don't pass judgment on any of these ideas. As a matter of fact, in the workshops that we lead, we specifically don't allow people to interject and say things like, no, that will never work. No, that's a bad idea or a stupid idea. Because all ideas at this stage are good, because even if they turn out not to pass our evaluation criteria, they will spark other ideas amongst people in the workshop that will turn out to be good ideas. And what we don't want to do is embarrass people so that they won't come up with any other ideas or speak up during the workshop. And the fastest way of keeping people from participating in the workshop is to tell them that you think they just said something stupid. I know that I wouldn't react very well to that, and you probably wouldn't react well to that either. After we generate this very long list of ideas, we quickly want to focus them. We cluster these ideas into various platforms where there's a common thread of R&D and or market focus. We come up with corporate criteria for our clients with their participation clearly, that helps us evaluate these ideas and rank these ideas. And then we come up with ways of following up these ideas in a process which we'll quickly describe in the next few minutes to generate a short list of actionable opportunities. This process can, depending on the focus and the needs of our clients, can take anywhere from a day to 3 days. The point here is it doesn't take 6 months to go through this process, because that would represent too big a strain and too big an investment of resources across the organization. Next, the process here we've already pretty much described. We brainstorm, we cluster, that starts to focus the process. We develop criteria, we rank, and then we start to evaluate our ideas. And so this is more of a graphic presentation of both the divergent area part of the process, where we generate lots of small ideas, and then we use screening and clustering to focus these ideas. Next. Again, there are no bad ideas at this point. We create templates that allow our participants in these workshops to develop some ideas beforehand. And these templates are focused on customer needs and competitive benefits. What we don't want are these ideas to be independent of what perceived customer needs are. After all, innovation is really the intersection of new technologies and new business models, the application, new ways of applying existing technologies with unmet customer needs. That's what distinguishes invention from innovation. And even at the early stage, even before the workshop commences, we want our participants to focus on unmet customer needs and how their ideas meet those needs and are different and better than any other potential solutions that are currently in the laboratory or in the marketplace. Next. Again, we generate these large numbers. We use a group clustering process. One of the things that we have found out in doing this exercise is that after the first day or half day of these brainstorming ideation exercises, it is not uncommon for the workshop participants and our the leaders of our project on the client side to take one of us aside and basically express concern that they don't see how they could possibly deal with all of these ideas and get to where there might be a kernel of a good idea or ideas. And what we need to do at this point is reassure them that we are rapidly going to enter a focusing process where it will become obvious what the platforms are to develop and to focus the ideas into discrete areas for evaluation. Next. Some of the criteria that we have developed over the years are obvious and some aren't. Some of the ones that tend to pop up frequently are what the market size will be, what the market growth rate will be, what the gross margins will be, what the IP position is. Can you easily develop a freedom to operate, or is the patent position really dominated by other companies? What the competing products and technologies are. But there are a large number of other potential ideas, and we'll see some examples in a few minutes. We also develop weighting criteria. For some companies, market size may get an 80% rating. For other companies, the fit with the existing corporate culture may get an 80% rating. This is very specific on the culture and the needs of a specific company, a specific client. Next. This is a table that's indicative of the sort of criteria process that drives a criteria process. This is an example of a company that was in the materials business, where we developed a set of criteria. We can see here that they went for market value and gross margin as a leading areas, but they were also interested in IP, fit with their platform concept, and whether there were substitute products or materials. This table speaks for itself, but there is a high degree of uh, variableness in the sort of table that one comes up with. But the fact that it's relatively simple allows our clusters of ideas to be evaluated fairly quickly without, at a first cut, without taking 6 months of effort. Now, of course, this is only the first step, and ultimately we do need to put in more time to focus our evaluation criteria in greater depth and to help us implement a stage gate development process. Next. Here is basically a list of the sorts of areas that are usually followed up with in a longer market research report on the leading areas that pass through the initial evaluation process that we just saw an example of in the previous slide. Everything from a more in-depth description of value chain, supply chains, who the customers are, what the channels are likely to be, what the R&D intensity is in a given area, whether or not the area, the product is available to a large-scale manufacturing approach versus more of a small-scale pilot approach, and what the various business model options might be. These are clearly more detailed and are dealt with more in depth, but even this sort of evaluation is meant to be completed for each area in a few weeks as opposed to months or years. This at least gets us to the information we need to develop key performance indicators for a stage gate process. Next, we're going to look at the scenario planning process and how it can be used for fitting together with innovation management, for lowering risks, and for creating, in this particular example, an R&D strategy for carbon dioxide capture and reuse. Next. There is a lot of confusion out there about what scenarios are. In the process that we use, it's more apt to say that we are looking at decision-focused scenarios. So we're not looking about general predictions of what the future would look like. We're not looking for, um, 1, 2, or 3 sigma variations over a specific, around a specific future endpoint. Um, we are not looking for future views that are detached from your decision focus. What we are looking here at are detailed descriptions of plausible futures that are based on the factors that are going to have an immediate influence on your decision. So we call these decision-focused scenarios, not just scenarios or alternative general futures. We want these to be useful for allowing you to come up with strategies that will focus on high impact, high uncertainty forces that will affect your strategic decisions and will allow you to include in each of your scenarios high impact, low uncertainty forces that we believe will be present no matter what. So here, having these scenarios focused on your decision is extremely important and will allow you to avoid what we call a scenario theater or corporate entertainment, because general scenarios that are not focused on specific technology decisions are fun and interesting, but are not particularly useful. Next. Now, there are a lot of business and technology decisions out there that are influenced by a lot of interrelated factors. And all of these complex relationships come into play when developing scenarios. So, in our scenario planning exercises, we look at global trade, global economics, resource issues, environmental regulations, social change, consumer acceptance of technology, competing technologies, the global state of technology decisions, and other interrelated factors. So it's not just simply a matter of looking at local states of technology or what your direct competitors in the marketplace are up to. And we'll see this in more detail in the rest of this talk. Next, please. So now we're going to look at the more specific example of carbon capture and reuse and the development of decision-focused scenarios. And for this, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Ken Sinclair.
Hello. Well, as Mitch said, scenario planning is really, it really shines in situations whereas there is a lot of complexity as well as a lot of uncertainty. So we wanted to give an example to assist in understanding what the methodology is doing and how to use it in different situations. So in the carbon capture and storage area, there is a lot of complexity. There are well over 400 technologies. Any company developing a scenario to get to net zero by 2050 or whenever is going to have to use several of those technologies. And this has all got to be guided in an environment where government policy options are changing. And that's down to city governments, state governments, national and international standard-setting organizations. So with this great uncertainty, you really need a methodology to come up with a robust strategic plan.
The major benefits of scenario planning. The scenario planning methodology is really split into 6 different elements. To identify the decision focus, we've already discussed how important that is. Identifying the key decision factors, developing a very long list of key external forces and drivers, grouping these external forces and drivers into axes of uncertainty based on the high impact, high uncertainty forces, then developing scenarios based on those forces and using these scenarios to analyze decision implications. Next. In this case, our decision focus is what should our technology strategy be with respect to carbon dioxide capture and reuse. And the key decision elements are summarized in terms of which technologies are important for our future business. How does a given technology support our future strategic requirements? What should our technology investment priorities be? How should we obtain these technologies? And what is the timing for us to pursue these technologies? We know that the decision factors will be split into two decision forces, I should say, will be split into two areas. Micro forces, including shifts in technology, customer needs, and business models, and the macro forces, some of which we've already discussed, which entails the demographic trends, trade patterns, and political shifts. We build conceptual models of this business environment and then analyze these forces and drivers for their dynamics, uncertainties, history, and future tech trajectories. We then look at the level of impact and uncertainty of these forces and then proceed to build scenarios on the high impact, high uncertainty, and high impact, low uncertainty forces. Of course, clearly one wants to include things in the scenarios that will have high impact. Otherwise, we don't really need to bother with them. Next. And again, this is more of a matrix view. If you're doing an impact versus uncertainty matrix, you will see that we want to focus in the upper right corner as well as in the upper left corner for generating our scenario and for putting order on this diverse set of information. You'll notice that in both the innovation process and the scenario process, are focused on generating as much diverse information as possible and then putting useful degree of order onto both the innovation and the scenario building processes. Next. Again, we group the high impact, high uncertainty forces into areas that enable us to create a limited number of axes of uncertainty that provide us logics that we can use to start creating discrete scenarios focused on our strategic decisions. Next. Now, to show you what a sort of large variety of these forces are with respect to carbon dioxide capture and reuse, we've put together a quick list, and Ken will go into this in a little bit more detail than I have just now. Ken?
Thanks, Mitch. What we have here is on the, it's difficult to read, but the text is there. A list on the left-hand side are the macro forces, and on the right hand are the micro forces. And for each of these forces that have been identified by the company innovation experts, we are looking to assign an impact from low to high and an uncertainty that's associated with each force. So, for example, on the macro side, near the top there, one of the forces is investor pressure to do something about climate change. Investors know that disinvestment and threats of disinvestment force companies to do what the investors want. So this could have a very high impact, but the uncertainty is very low because it's already going on. Further down the list, we have on the cost and energy side, the cost of green hydrogen. Hydrogen is a key reactant in getting rid of carbon dioxide. And green hydrogen is hydrogen made from renewable electricity. So it's a very high impact force, because you really need hydrogen in a lot of possible options. And it's a very high uncertainty. The cost of hydrogen at the moment is way too high to be even partially applicable to getting rid of CO2. But the technology is improving, and hopefully the costs will come down, but we don't know by how much and when. And on the micro side, one example might be in looking at the future competitive environment, battery storage is something that's going to be critical to enable renewable energy to play a role in total replacement of other sources of electricity. And of course, batteries are essential for electric vehicles, which are one of the key paths to reduce emissions. And battery storage, it's a high impact, and the uncertainty is low to medium, really, because battery technologies are developing so fast right now that it's difficult to know whether the company has chosen the right chemistry for the battery or the right partner for the battery. And that introduces a lot of uncertainty. So next slide. So from all this, we sift through for the high impact, high uncertainty forces, and those are the ones we need to consider in the scenario analysis. And in the next slide, the high impact, low uncertainty forces, which also need to be considered and put on these axes of uncertainty. Next slide. So back to you, Mitch.
Thanks, Ken. For this exercise, we were able to cluster the forces into 4 different axes: technology availability, the hydrogen economy, government policies, and technology costs. And they range on the low end in tech availability, for example, for no availability at scale, to at the high end availability at scale. And you can see the other areas here in terms of hydrogen economy, government policies, and tech costs, what a high rating would be and what a low rating would be. In constructing the scenarios, that would enable us to generate 2 to the 4th or 16 potential scenarios or combinations of logics. In this particular case, we will only look at 3 of them to provide us, for instructional purposes, on 3 very different alternative futures that will affect the technology strategy decisions for carbon dioxide capture and reuse. Next. So what we're going to do here, as alluded to earlier, is create a set of scenarios based on the positive and negative combinations of these strategies as seen on the previous axes. Next. We see here that what we're attempting to do is to create what's called an envelope of uncertainty around the plausibility of these different scenarios actually happening. So what we want are plausible scenarios that cover the range of uncertainty based on our forces that have high impact and either high uncertainty or low uncertainty. Next. And then we'll take a quick look at what the implications are for each of these scenarios. And in this case, the decision we're looking at is what kind of technology strategy we should have for carbon dioxide capture and reuse. Next. And, if we were doing this in depth, we would use the scenarios to look at threats and opportunities, critical success factors in each of the alternative scenarios, what are the strategic options, and what are the signposts. What changes would occur in the external environment that would be an early signal that we should consider changing our technology strategy. Next. In the first scenario we'll look at briefly, we call this scenario Brave, Cool World. One of the things, incidentally, that you find when you do these workshops is a tendency for the participants to give these scenarios interesting or cute titles so that they're easy to remember and provide some degree of amusement to people who have been working together closely for a long period of time. In this case, we're looking at a scenario that rates high on all four axes. And so we're looking briefly with carbon dioxide capture and reuse together with hydrogen synthesis and storage and the circular economy are all practical and affordable. And this puts a lot of pressure on renewables as a primary tool against climate change. There's a lot of government support across the world to boost carbon dioxide capture and reuse, and that we have significantly had an impact on avoiding climate Armageddon. And one of the impacts, again in a summary version on the strategy, is to focus investments in capture and reuse and away from renewables per se. Next. In this next scenario, renewables and recycling win, but not without issues. In this case, carbon dioxide capture and reuse are low on all four axes. And what that basically means is that efforts to develop and commercialize carbon dioxide capture and reuse at scale to make a sufficient dent in climate change have failed, even though there have been some fragmented government and attempts to support the approach globally. So this leaves recycling and renewables as a major target of industries attempting to satisfy investors and mitigate global warming. And this has strong implications to support technology strategy investments in renewables and the circular economy. Next. We have in this scenario what we call all dressed up and nowhere to go, that there's a lot of technology availability in terms of carbon dioxide capture and reuse and associated hydrogen economy issues and technology, but costs are high and government support is low, which means that we have the scalable technology and a foundation to start getting into a hydrogen economy, but the fragmented government efforts at supporting the cost structure have limited use to the most high value applications, which leaves the bulk of greenhouse gas reduction to renewable sources of energy, such as wind, solar, and nuclear, and that this still tends to favor focusing strategy in renewables, hydrogen, and the circular economy. So this just gives a taste of what a full scenario analysis would look like. When doing these scenarios, full scenarios would resemble more short stories or small novellas with a lot of data, a lot of detail that would help make more detailed strategic decisions. Next. So, in summary, we've discussed how scenario planning could be used to lower risk and help you engage with your commodity businesses, as well as lower the risk of innovating and keeping resource allocations low in the innovation process, and how innovation and IP management processes can help you develop and test new, innovative, high margin ideas rapidly that allow you to keep your company's innovation processes going in an efficient, low cost manner. So, thank you for your attention, and we certainly welcome your questions offline.
Okay, thank you very much to you as well. And as you can see, well, we have expertise. One of our areas, functional areas of expertise is this one on scenario planning. And this is an example of how EnerChem services are provided to become the destination of choice for any company or executive seeking tailored expert knowledge in the energy, chemicals, and advanced materials supply chain. Thank you very much.
Mauricio, Mitch, and Ken, thank you very much for joining us and for this useful information that you presented today. Gracias a todos además por participar y esperamos verlos en nuestra próxima sesión con expertos. Hasta la próxima.